A woman boards a commercial flight with strict orders: stay hidden, speak to no one, arrive safely. But when enemy forces discover her presence, F-22 fighter jets suddenly surround the plane. Now she must reveal her secret identity as a legendary combat pilot to save 200 innocent passengers from a deadly missile racing toward them at 30,000 feet. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Sarah Mitchell stood in the busy terminal at Denver International Airport, watching thousands of travelers rush past her with their suitcases and coffee cups. She looked exactly like them. Just another tired passenger in jeans and a gray sweater, carrying a small backpack and checking her phone. Nobody gave her a second glance. Nobody knew that the woman waiting quietly at gate B37 was supposed to disappear completely for the next 4 hours. Her orders were clear and absolute. Board Flight 2847 to Washington Reagan. Sit down. Stay quiet. Speak to nobody. Arrive safely. Most importantly, remain completely invisible. The passport in her hand said Emma Thompson. The credit card she used at the coffee shop had the same name. Even her airline reservation showed a different person entirely. Sarah Mitchell did not exist anymore, at least not for the next several hours. She had done this before, traveling under false identities, blending into crowds of ordinary people while carrying secrets that could change everything. But this time felt different. This time, the weight of what she was protecting pressed harder against her chest. This time, enemy intelligence services across 3 continents were actively hunting for her, and if they discovered she was on this commercial flight heading east across America, the consequences would be catastrophic. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she held the coffee cup, and she forced them still. The fear was always there, buried deep beneath the training and experience. Fear that one small mistake would expose her. Fear that innocent people would die because she had chosen the wrong flight, the wrong seat, the wrong moment to breathe too deeply. 3 months ago, she had watched a safe house burn with people inside because someone had recognized her silhouette through a window for 2 seconds. 2 seconds. That was all it took for everything to collapse. That was why her handlers insisted on complete invisibility this time. No risks. No chances. Just another forgettable face in another forgettable crowd. She had spent the last 6 months completely off the grid after her last mission went sideways in ways that still gave her nightmares. The operation had been perfect until it wasn't. She had extracted the intelligence, gotten her team out safely, and disappeared into the shadows exactly as planned. But somewhere in the chaos, someone had photographed her face. Someone had identified her. Now hostile forces in multiple countries wanted her dead, and the only thing keeping her alive was absolute anonymity. Her handlers had been explicit during the final briefing 3 hours ago. No communications. No recognition. No heroics. Just be another forgettable passenger on another forgettable flight. The boarding announcement crackled through the gate area speakers. Sarah picked up her backpack and moved toward the line, keeping her head down, her movements unremarkable. She handed her boarding pass to the gate agent with a slight smile, received a professional nod in return, and walked down the jet bridge like thousands of other passengers that morning. Inside the Boeing 737, she found her seat in row 23, middle of the cabin, window seat. Perfect position for remaining unnoticed. She settled in, buckled her seatbelt, and pulled out a paperback novel she had no intention of actually reading. The passengers around her filed past with the usual mixture of business travelers, families, and tourists. A middle-aged man in a suit took the aisle seat beside her, immediately opening his laptop. A young mother struggled with a toddler 2 rows ahead. Everything looked perfectly normal. Perfectly forgettable, exactly what she needed. Sarah opened her book to a random page and stared at words without reading them, her mind reviewing the operational parameters one more time. 4-hour flight. No communications. Nobody knows who you are. Nobody can know who you are. Stay hidden. What none of the passengers boarding Flight 2847 could possibly know was that the quiet woman in 23A had flown combat missions over hostile territory that would never appear in any official record. She had coordinated rescue operations from cockpits while enemy missiles locked onto her aircraft. She had trained pilots who went on to become legends themselves, though none of them ever learned her real name or saw her face clearly enough to remember. The government that sent her on impossible missions had given her a call sign years ago that still made veteran pilots go silent when they heard it whispered. They called her Phantom because she appeared when situations became desperate and disappeared before anyone could thank her properly. But that was supposed to be finished now. She was supposed to be transitioning to a desk job, analyzing intelligence instead of gathering it personally. This flight was supposed to be the final step in that process. Get to Washington. Debrief. Disappear into bureaucracy forever. The flight attendants moved through their safety demonstrations while Sarah looked out the window at the Denver tarmac. The morning sun glinted off other aircraft taxiing toward runways. Everything looked peaceful and routine. The Boeing's engines spooled up with their familiar whine. The captain's voice came through the speakers with weather information and flight time estimates. 4 hours to Reagan National. Sarah closed her eyes briefly and allowed herself to imagine arriving safely, walking off this airplane without incident, finally reaching the secure facility where she could stop hiding. Flight 2847 pushed back from the gate exactly on schedule. The aircraft taxied toward the runway while passengers settled into their seats, most of them already absorbed in phones or tablets or conversations. Nobody paid attention to the woman in 23A who sat perfectly still, her paperback open but unread, her eyes tracking the landscape outside with the practiced awareness of someone trained to notice everything. The Boeing accelerated down the runway and lifted smoothly into Colorado's bright morning sky. Denver fell away beneath them as the aircraft climbed through 10,000 feet, then 20,000, leveling eventually at cruising altitude above a scattered layer of white clouds. Sarah allowed herself to relax slightly as the flight settled into its routine. The drink service began. The businessman beside her ordered coffee and returned to his laptop. The toddler 2 rows ahead finally stopped crying. Everything remained absolutely normal. She accepted a bottle of water from the flight attendant with a quiet thank you and returned to pretending to read her book. 2 hours passed without incident. Then 3 hours. They were more than halfway to Washington when Sarah finally began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this would actually work. Maybe she would complete this final mission without drama or danger. Maybe she could actually disappear into her new quiet life. She was wrong. The change came subtly at first. Sarah noticed it before anyone else did because she had been trained to notice everything. The aircraft's flight path adjusted slightly. Nothing dramatic, just a gentle turn that most passengers wouldn't even feel. But Sarah felt it. She had spent too many hours in cockpits not to recognize when pilots deviated from planned routes. Her hand tightened on the armrest. The businessman beside her continued typing. Nobody else seemed aware that anything had changed. Sarah stared out the window, searching the empty sky for explanations, seeing only blue emptiness and scattered clouds below. Then she saw it. The F-22 Raptor appeared off the left wing so suddenly that Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The stealth fighter materialized from nowhere, its distinctive angular profile unmistakable even at distance. For 3 heartbeats, Sarah told herself this was coincidence. Military aircraft shared airspace with commercial flights all the time. Training exercises happened. This meant nothing. But the F-22 held formation position with their Boeing, matching speed exactly, staying close enough that Sarah could see details of its weapon systems and the pilot's helmet in the cockpit. Then another F-22 appeared on the right side. Then 2 more dropped into position slightly behind and above them. Within 90 seconds, 4 F-22 Raptors surrounded Flight 2847 in a diamond intercept formation that Sarah recognized immediately from her classified training. This was not coincidence. This was not a training exercise. This was an active military intercept of a commercial aircraft, something that happened only under extraordinary circumstances. Something that meant a critical threat had been identified. The businessman beside Sarah suddenly noticed the fighters. His coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. Across the aisle, a woman screamed. Passengers pressed against windows, pointing, their voices rising in confusion and terror. Within seconds, the entire cabin erupted into chaos. People shouted questions nobody could answer. Children started crying. Someone yelled that they were being hijacked. A man 3 rows back demanded to know what was happening. The cabin crew tried to maintain calm, but Sarah could hear the fear in their voices. Nobody understood why elite military fighters would surround a routine commercial flight. Nobody except Sarah. A teenage girl 2 rows ahead was sobbing into her mother's shoulder, asking if they were going to die. An elderly man across the aisle gripped his wife's hand so tightly his knuckles turned white, whispering prayers Sarah could barely hear over the chaos. A business traveler in first class was shouting into his phone before a flight attendant reminded him that all cellular devices needed to be off, but he ignored her, his voice cracking as he told someone he loved them in case he didn't make it home. The fear in the cabin was thick and suffocating, almost visible in the air. These were ordinary people on an ordinary Tuesday morning flight. They had been reading books, working on laptops, dozing peacefully with their shoes off and their seats reclined. Now they stared at military fighters through windows and wondered what they had done to deserve this terror, what invisible threat lurked in the sky around them. Sarah wanted to stand up and tell them the truth. Tell them they were safe, that those fighters were protection not threat, that she would keep them alive no matter what it cost her. But she couldn't. Not yet. Revealing herself too early might make things worse. Might cause panic focused specifically on her. Might make passengers realize that one person among them had brought this danger to their flight, and anger could be as dangerous as fear in a confined space at 30,000 feet. So she sat silent and still while people around her cried and prayed and held each other, and the guilt settled into her bones like poison spreading through her bloodstream. Her cover was compromised. Somehow, despite all the precautions and false identities and careful planning, enemy intelligence had identified her presence on this aircraft. The F-22s weren't here to threaten Flight 2847. They were here to protect it. To protect her, which meant hostile forces had made a move against her flight, which meant passengers all around her were now in danger because she was aboard. Sarah felt ice flood her veins. This was exactly what she had been ordered to prevent. Stay hidden. Don't create incidents. Don't expose civilians to risk. She had failed before the flight even landed. The captain's voice came through the speakers, strained and tight. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and stay seated with your seatbelts fastened. We are experiencing an unusual situation, but your safety is our primary concern. Please follow all crew instructions. The announcement did nothing to calm anyone. Passengers continued shouting, demanding explanations, filming the fighters on their phones. Sarah sat frozen in her seat, her mind racing through scenarios and protocols. She knew exactly what those F-22s meant. She knew what procedures were being followed. She knew that in the cockpit right now, the pilots were receiving classified communications from military air traffic controllers. Communications that would reveal her presence aboard, communications that would identify her priority protection status. Through the window, Sarah watched the lead F-22 off the left wing. She could see the pilot's head turning, scanning, maintaining position with absolute precision. Those pilots were some of the best in the world, flying aircraft that cost more than most small nations' defense budgets. They had been scrambled to protect this commercial flight. To protect her. The enormity of the situation pressed down on her shoulders. Somewhere, hostile actors had made a move. Somewhere, intelligence failures had exposed her transit. Somewhere, decisions were being made about how to keep everyone aboard Flight 2847 alive. The flight attendant call button chimed urgently from the cockpit. Sarah watched a senior crew member rush forward and disappear through the door. When she emerged 2 minutes later, her face had gone pale. She moved directly to where Sarah sat and leaned down, her voice low and shaking. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me to the front of the aircraft immediately." Every passenger in nearby rows turned to stare. Sarah felt their eyes on her, their confusion and fear now focused on the quiet woman in 23A who was suddenly being singled out. The businessman beside her pressed back against his seat as if she might explode. Sarah met the flight attendant's frightened eyes and nodded once. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, moving into the aisle with deliberate calm while passengers watched in silence. Whatever was happening now, her hidden status was finished. The operation was compromised. All she could do was minimize the damage and try to keep everyone alive. The flight attendant led Sarah to the front galley area, away from passenger seats but still visible to those in the first few rows. Another crew member handed her the cockpit phone handset, their hands trembling. Sarah took the phone and heard a voice she recognized immediately. Colonel Marcus Webb, her handler, speaking from some secure facility hundreds of miles away. "Phantom, we have a critical situation. Hostile intelligence identified your transit through signals intercept approximately 40 minutes ago. We detected preparations for a surface-to-air missile launch targeting commercial traffic in your flight corridor. F-22s from Langley were scrambled for immediate protection. Your cover is completely compromised. We need your expertise to coordinate defensive procedures until we get you on the ground safely." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. 40 minutes. The enemy had known her location for 40 minutes while she sat oblivious, reading a paperback novel, thinking she was safe. "What's the threat assessment?" she asked quietly. "Mobile SAM system, location still uncertain. Could be anywhere within 50 miles of your current position. The F-22s are running active radar sweeps but these systems are designed to be hidden until launch. We're diverting you to Andrews Air Force Base where we can provide ground-based protection. But Phantom, we need you talking to those fighter pilots. They need your tactical knowledge to coordinate this protection until you're on the ground." "Understood." Sarah's voice remained steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Put me through to the flight lead." The connection clicked and a new voice came through, professional and controlled despite the tension Sarah could hear beneath it. "This is Raptor 1, flight lead." "Who am I speaking with?" "This is Phantom." Sarah used her call sign deliberately, knowing what it would mean to the F-22 pilot. She heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the connection. Even among elite fighter pilots, certain call signs carried legendary weight. Phantom was one of them. Stories about the pilot who earned that name circulated through secure briefing rooms, whispered between aviators who had been in situations desperate enough to warrant calling for ghost support. "Phantom." Raptor 1's voice carried new respect and disbelief. "The Phantom, from the Yemen extraction. The classified rescue over." "Confirmed." Sarah cut him off before he could mention operations that remained classified even from commercial pilots who might overhear. "I need your tactical picture. What are you seeing?" "For ship diamond formation, maintaining close protection on your Boeing. We have active radar running full sweep but no SAM system detected yet. AWACS is coordinating from high altitude. We have additional assets scrambling from 3 bases to create a defensive corridor toward Andrews. But ma'am, if a modern SAM launches from concealment, we have very limited time to react." Sarah knew the math better than most people. Modern surface-to-air missiles traveled at speeds that gave even F-22 pilots only seconds to respond. If a launch happened, the fighters would have to identify, track, and neutralize the threat in heartbeats. The Boeing she stood in had no defensive systems, no chaff or flares, nothing except the fighters surrounding it and her own knowledge of aerial combat that she was supposed to have left behind forever. Through the small window in the galley, Sarah could see the lead F-22 holding position off the wing. Passengers throughout the cabin pressed against windows, filming, taking photos, their fear mixing with confusion. Nobody understood what was happening. Nobody knew that the quiet woman who had been sitting in 23A for the last 3 hours was the reason America's most advanced stealth fighters surrounded their flight. Nobody knew that somewhere below them, hostile forces were preparing weapons designed to knock commercial aircraft from the sky. The captain's voice came through the cabin speakers again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have been directed to divert to Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland for an emergency landing. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We will be descending shortly." The announcement triggered fresh waves of panic throughout the cabin. People shouted questions. Children cried. Someone screamed that they were all going to die. Flight attendants moved through the aisles trying to maintain order while Sarah stood in the galley, phone pressed to her ear, coordinating with fighter pilots she couldn't see. "Phantom, this is Raptor 3, a new voice came through the connection. I have a question about your capabilities. Can you advise on defensive maneuvers if we detect a launch?" Sarah understood what he was really asking. The F-22 pilot wanted to know if the legendary pilot they had heard about in classified briefings could actually help coordinate their protection of the Boeing. If the stories were true. If Phantom was really the tactical genius that rumors suggested. Affirmative, Raptor 3. If you detect launch signature, immediately brake toward the threat vector while Raptor 2 maintains close protection on the Boeing's opposite side. Raptors 1 and 4 shift to intercept positions. The Boeing will need to execute emergency descent procedures to complicate the missile's tracking solution. I can coordinate with the commercial pilots to time the maneuvers with your intercept. Sarah's voice carried the confidence of someone who had done this before, who had coordinated aerial combat from cockpits while missiles streaked through the sky around her. "Copy that, Phantom. Standing by for your commands." The respect in Raptor 3's voice had grown. The F-22 pilot was beginning to believe the stories might be true. The Boeing began its descent toward Andrews. Sarah could feel the aircraft's nose drop, the engines throttling back. She moved forward and knocked on the cockpit door. The co-pilot opened it immediately, his face showing the strain of the last 20 minutes. Behind him, Sarah could see the captain maintaining steady hands on the controls while his entire professional world collapsed into chaos around him. Commercial pilots train for emergencies, but nothing prepared them for being surrounded by military fighters while carrying a protected intelligence asset being hunted by hostile forces. "I'm Phantom," Sarah said quietly. "I'm the reason those F-22s are here. I need to coordinate our descent procedures with their defensive patterns. May I come in?" The captain and co-pilot exchanged glances. They had received classified communications explaining that a high-value protected asset was aboard their flight and required fighter escort. They had not expected that asset to be a quiet woman in a gray sweater who apparently had tactical knowledge that made F-22 pilots defer to her judgment. "Come in," the captain said. His voice carried exhaustion and something close to relief. Whatever was happening, at least someone aboard seemed to know what to do. Sarah stepped into the cockpit and looked at the instruments, her eyes scanning the altitude, airspeed, navigation displays with practiced familiarity. Through the windscreen, she could see 2 of the F-22s holding formation ahead and above them. The pilot's training that she had supposedly left behind came flooding back instantly. The cockpit felt like home despite being a civilian aircraft. The sky looked familiar despite being filled with threats. "Raptor 1, this is Phantom. I'm in the cockpit now. We're going to coordinate a defensive descent profile that gives you maximum maneuverability if we detect a launch. Our Boeing can handle steep descents if necessary. What's your fuel state?" "Phantom, Raptor 1. All aircraft have sufficient fuel for the mission profile. We have tanker assets standing by if needed. Give us your recommended descent parameters." For the next 12 minutes, Sarah became something she had sworn she would never be again. She became a combat pilot coordinating a mission under fire. Her voice remained calm and controlled as she directed the Boeing's descent rate, advised the F-22s on optimal protection positions, and monitored the tactical situation that updated through encrypted data streams on the military frequency. The commercial pilots followed her instructions without question, recognizing that whatever this woman's background, she knew aerial combat better than they knew their own aircraft. Passengers in the cabin felt the Boeing descending faster than normal, but most were too frightened to notice details. They watched the F-22s through windows, filming, photographing, posting to social media despite flight attendants' requests to stop. The story was already spreading online. Commercial flight surrounded by fighters. Emergency diversion. Nobody knew yet that the reason involved a classified operative whose identity was supposed to remain hidden forever. Phantom, Raptor 4. I'm detecting possible radar emission, ground-based, mobile signature. Bearing 270, range uncertain. The F-22 pilot's voice remained professional, but Sarah heard the tension increase. The SAM system had revealed itself. All Raptors, break formation on my mark. Raptors 3 and 4 move to intercept vector. Raptors 1 and 2 maintain close protection on the Boeing. Boeing, on my command, initiate emergency descent, maximum rate. Sarah's voice cut through the frequency with absolute authority. The training, the experience, the classified missions that had earned her the Phantom call sign all came together in this moment. Raptor 4, launch detection. SAM is active, missile away, tracking the Boeing. The fighter pilot's voice exploded through the frequency. Time seemed to slow down in that moment. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She could see the captain's hand tighten on the controls. She could feel the weight of 200 lives pressing down on her shoulders. This was the moment everything had been building toward. The moment when her expertise would either save everyone aboard or fail catastrophically. There was no middle ground. No partial success. Either the missile would hit them and everyone would die, or it wouldn't and they would live. 3 seconds to make decisions that would determine which outcome happened. Boeing, emergency descent now, full speed brakes, maximum rate. Sarah's command came simultaneously with the captain pushing the controls forward. The Boeing's nose dropped sharply. Passengers throughout the cabin screamed as the aircraft entered the steepest descent most of them had ever experienced. Overhead bins rattled violently. Coffee cups and phones flew through the air. Laptops slid from tray tables and crashed into the seats ahead. The flight attendants gripped their jump seats as the Boeing dove toward the ground at a rate that made the aircraft shudder and groan. The teenage girl who had been crying earlier was now screaming at the top of her lungs. Her mother held her tightly, both of them pressed back into their seats by forces they didn't understand. The elderly couple across the aisle had their eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer as their hands remained locked together. Throughout the cabin, people were sobbing, shouting, gripping armrests so hard their fingers went white. They didn't know about the missile climbing toward them from below. They didn't know they had seconds to live unless the evasive maneuver worked. They just knew their airplane had suddenly become a falling stone and their lives hung in the balance. Raptors 3 and 4, weapons free, engaged that SAM site. Sarah watched through the cockpit windscreen as 2 F-22s broke formation and accelerated toward the threat. Raptors 1 and 2, deploy chaff, maintain protection formation. The lead F-22s released clouds of metallic chaff that bloomed in the air around the descending Boeing, creating radar confusion for the incoming missile. Sarah watched the tactical display on the encrypted tablet that the captain had received along with the classified communications. A red icon indicated the missile climbing toward them. Green icons showed the F-22s maneuvering to protect them. Everything happened in seconds that felt like hours. Phantom, Raptor 3. Missile destroyed SAM site with precision strike. Threat neutralized. The F-22 pilot's voice carried savage satisfaction. Somewhere below them, the mobile missile launcher had been eliminated by weapons that cost more than the equipment they destroyed. But that equipment had threatened a commercial aircraft carrying innocent people. Had threatened Phantom. The military response had been immediate and overwhelming. Raptor 4 confirms target destruction. We're RTB for rearm. The second intercepting F-22 reported returning to base while the other fighters maintained protection around the Boeing. Sarah felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. The immediate threat was gone. The missile that had been climbing toward them was falling from the sky in burning pieces. Nobody aboard the Boeing had seen the aerial combat that happened too fast and too far away for civilian eyes to track. "Boeing, you can resume normal descent profile. Take us into Andrews." Sarah's voice gentled as she addressed the commercial pilots who had just survived a surface-to-air missile launch through no fault except carrying the wrong passenger. "You did perfectly. Your crew kept everyone safe." The captain's hands shook slightly as he pulled the Boeing out of its emergency descent and leveled the aircraft. Passengers throughout the cabin sobbed and clung to each other. Nobody understood exactly what had just happened. They knew the F-22s were protecting them from something. They knew the sudden violent descent had been an emergency response. But most of them would never learn how close they had come to being shot from the sky by hostile forces targeting a single passenger. Andrews Air Force Base appeared ahead, its runways clear, emergency vehicles standing by. The F-22s maintained formation as the Boeing descended toward landing. Sarah watched them through the windscreen, these pilots she had coordinated with, who had trusted her tactical judgment, who had protected everyone aboard based on her commands. They were some of the best aviators in the world and they had just proven it by saving 200 passengers who would never know their names. The Boeing touched down smooth and solid on Andrews's runway. The captain brought it to a stop and Sarah heard him exhale deeply. Through the cockpit windscreen, she could see military vehicles approaching. Security teams, intelligence officers, her new handlers who would debrief her on how spectacularly her hidden transit had failed. But everyone was alive. The passengers who had simply wanted to fly from Denver to Washington were safe. The crew who had done nothing wrong except accept her booking were unhurt. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed safely at Andrews Air Force Base. Please remain seated until further instructions from security personnel." The captain's announcement triggered fresh confusion throughout the cabin, but Sarah was already opening the cockpit door, preparing to face the consequences of her compromised mission. She walked through the first-class cabin and down the aisle toward her original seat. Every passenger watched her pass. They had seen her being called to the cockpit. They had felt the emergency descent. They had watched the F-22s escort them to a military base. And now this quiet woman in a gray sweater walked past them like she had done this before. Like coordinating with fighter pilots and surviving missile attacks was routine. The teenage girl who had been crying earlier stared at Sarah with wide eyes as she passed. "Were you flying the plane?" she whispered to her mother, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Was she the one who saved us?" The mother had no answer, just pulled her daughter closer and watched Sarah with an expression that mixed gratitude and confusion and something close to awe. The elderly couple across the aisle nodded at Sarah as she passed, a gesture of respect that needed no words. They didn't know exactly what had happened, but they understood that somehow this woman had been involved in keeping them alive. A man in a business suit stood up as Sarah approached, blocking the aisle. His face showed anger and fear competing for dominance. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "Why did those fighters come? What did you do to put us all in danger?" Other passengers turned to look, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads. The cabin divided instantly between those who saw Sarah as their protector and those who saw her as the reason they had almost died. "I'm sorry you were frightened," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying through the silent cabin. "I can't tell you who I am or why this happened. But those fighters weren't here to threaten us. They were here to protect us. Everyone on this aircraft is safe now, and that's what matters most." She held the angry man's gaze until he finally stepped aside, letting her pass. Military security boarded through the forward door, moving directly to Sarah. They wore plain clothes but carried themselves with unmistakable military bearing. One of them held up an ID badge. "Ma'am, please come with us." Sarah nodded and walked toward the exit. Behind her, passengers began taking photos, filming, their phones capturing images that would spread across social media within minutes. The quiet passenger from seat 23A being escorted away by security. Speculation would explode online about who she was, why fighters had protected the flight, what had really happened 30,000 feet above America. Her hidden status was finished forever. Phantom's identity, carefully protected for so many years, was about to become public knowledge whether she wanted it or not. The security team led her across the tarmac toward a waiting vehicle while the F-22s that had protected her flight touched down on parallel runways. Sarah watched them land, watched these magnificent aircraft settle onto concrete after saving everyone aboard Flight 2847. She wanted to thank the pilots personally, to shake their hands, to acknowledge what they had done. But she knew that wouldn't happen. They would be debriefed separately. She would be processed through different channels. The mission would be analyzed and documented in classified reports that nobody would ever read. Inside the secure vehicle, Colonel Webb waited with expressions that combined relief and frustration. Phantom, that was the worst operational security failure I've seen in 20 years. Every intelligence agency on 3 continents is going to be analyzing footage of those F-22s escorting a commercial flight. Your identity is compromised beyond repair. The quiet retirement we planned is impossible now. Sarah looked at him steadily. Sir, 200 innocent people are alive right now who would be dead if we hadn't responded. I'd say that's a successful mission despite the operational failure. Webb's expression softened slightly. The F-22 pilots are calling you a legend. Raptor 1 said you coordinated the defense better than their tactical officers. That you knew exactly how to use their capabilities to protect the Boeing. He asked how someone who was supposed to be transitioning to desk work had that level of combat knowledge. What did you tell him? The truth. That Phantom's service record is classified at levels he'll never access. That the missions you've flown remain secret because acknowledging them would compromise ongoing operations. That the woman who just helped save Flight 2847 has been saving people like that for longer than most of those fighter pilots have been flying. Webb paused, then pulled out a tablet and turned it toward her. But Sarah, look at this. It's already everywhere. The screen showed social media feeds exploding with posts about Flight 2847. Videos filmed by passengers showed the F-22's information, the emergency descent, military vehicles surrounding the aircraft at Andrews. Hashtags were trending worldwide. Speculation ran wild about who the mysterious woman was, why fighters had escorted a commercial flight, what threat had existed that required such dramatic military response. News networks were already covering the story, aviation experts offering theories, former military personnel giving interviews about intercept procedures. How many views? Sarah asked quietly. Over 20 million in the last hour. It's the biggest aviation story of the year. CNN is camped outside Andrews requesting interviews. The airline stock dropped 3 points before trading was halted. The FAA is being flooded with questions. And Sarah, hostile intelligence services are using facial recognition on every passenger video, trying to identify you. We've already intercepted 3 separate attempts to breach our personnel databases. Webb closed the tablet. Your effectiveness required anonymity. Now that's gone. Every hostile intelligence service knows your face, your patterns, your capabilities. We can't send you back into the field. We can't even send you to a normal desk job. You're too high profile now. Sarah felt the weight of those words. Everything she had built, every mission she had flown under the cover of absolute secrecy, was finished. The Phantom legend had always worked because nobody could confirm it existed. Now everyone had proof. Now her face would be analyzed, her history investigated, her future operations impossible. She had saved 200 people, but the cost was her entire career in covert operations. The passengers, Sarah said suddenly. They're going to be questioned. Traumatized. Some of them were terrified because I was aboard. They deserve to know the truth. Absolutely not, Webb said sharply. We can't confirm anything about your identity or mission. Official story is that the aircraft received a credible threat requiring military escort. That's all anyone gets to know. They watched a SAM launch get intercepted. They felt their plane nearly fall from the sky. They saw me walking to the cockpit like I knew what was happening. Those people deserve better than lies and classified briefings that tell them nothing. Sarah met Webb's eyes. I want permission to speak with them before they leave Andrews. Not about classified details, but to at least acknowledge what they survived. Webb was quiet for a long moment. That's against every protocol we have. So was coordinating with F-22s over an open frequency while passengers listened. So was revealing my tactical knowledge to commercial pilots. I've already broken every protocol. Let me finish by doing the right thing for people who almost died because of me. Sarah watched through the vehicle's window as Flight 2847's passengers began disembarking, escorted by security teams who would question them, take their statements, request they delete photos that would be online already anyway. She saw families hugging, couples holding hands, children clutching their parents. All of them alive because of decisions made in seconds at 30,000 feet. 30 minutes later, Sarah stood in a secure briefing room at Andrews where the passengers from Flight 2847 had been gathered. 200 faces stared at her with expressions ranging from gratitude to anger to simple exhaustion. The teenage girl who had been crying sat in the front row with her mother. The elderly couple held hands near the back. The businessman who had confronted her in the aisle stood with arms crossed, waiting for explanations. Security personnel lined the walls, and Sarah knew this was highly irregular. Unprecedented, actually. Covert operatives didn't address the civilians they had inadvertently endangered. But Webb had finally agreed after Sarah made it clear she would resign if necessary to speak with these people. My name is Sarah Mitchell, she began, and felt the weight of using her real name for the first time in months. I was aboard your flight today under a false identity because hostile forces were hunting for me. I was supposed to remain completely hidden. I was supposed to arrive in Washington without anyone knowing I existed. But intelligence failures exposed my presence, and enemy forces attempted to shoot down your aircraft to eliminate me. Those F-22 fighters surrounded us to protect you from a threat you never should have faced. The room erupted. People shouted questions. Some demanded to know why she had been allowed on their flight. Others wanted to know who was hunting her and why. The businessman from the aisle stepped forward, his face red. You put us all in danger. My family could have died because you were on that plane. You're right, Sarah said quietly, and the room fell silent. You're absolutely right. Every person in this room was endangered because I was aboard. The military did everything possible to protect you, but the risk existed because of me. I can't apologize enough for that. But I want you to know that those F-22 pilots are heroes. The captain and crew of your flight performed perfectly under impossible pressure. And every single person in this room survived something that very few people ever face. The teenage girl in the front row raised her hand tentatively. Were you really flying the plane? During the dive? Sarah smiled slightly. No. Your captain flew the aircraft brilliantly. I just helped coordinate with the fighter pilots because I have some experience with aerial combat. But your crew kept you safe. Remember their faces, remember their professionalism, because they're the real heroes today. Who are you? An older woman asked. Really? Why were people trying to kill you? I work for the government in situations that require secrecy. The people hunting me were hostile intelligence services who wanted to prevent me from completing my mission. That's all I can tell you. But I promise you this, the threat is over. The people who tried to hurt your flight have been dealt with. You're safe now, and you'll remain safe. The elderly man from across the aisle stood slowly. Young lady, I flew missions over Vietnam 50 years ago. I know what it sounds like when someone with combat experience coordinates under fire. Whatever you did up there, whatever classified work you can't talk about, you saved our lives today. So on behalf of this old pilot and his wife, thank you." He saluted, a gesture that made Sarah's eyes burn with unexpected tears. Others began clapping. Not everyone, some passengers still looked angry or frightened or simply confused. But enough people applauded that Sarah felt the emotion rising in her throat. These people didn't know her call sign. They didn't know her missions or her classified record. They just knew that somehow, she had helped keep them alive when death came climbing toward them in the form of a missile they never saw. "You'll all be questioned by security," Sarah continued when the applause faded. "They'll ask you not to share certain details publicly. I'm asking you personally to respect that request. Not for me, but for the pilots and crew who protected you. They deserve to do their jobs without becoming media celebrities. But whatever you decide to share, whatever you post online or tell reporters, I want you to know this: today was terrifying. Today was dangerous. But today also proved that there are people in uniforms and cockpits who will risk everything to keep strangers safe. Remember that. Remember them." She looked at each section of the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. "I'm sorry you were frightened. I'm sorry your routine flight became international news. I'm sorry your families worried and your plans were disrupted. But I'm grateful beyond words that everyone in this room survived. That's what matters most to me. Your lives, your families, your futures. Everything else is secondary." As Sarah left the briefing room, the teenager caught up with her in the hallway. "I want to be like you," the girl said breathlessly. "I want to learn to fly. I want to help people. Can you tell me how?" Sarah looked at this young woman whose life had been changed by terror and survival in equal measure. "Work hard. Study everything. Be brave when it matters. And remember that the best pilots aren't the ones who seek glory, they're the ones who protect others when nobody else can." She squeezed the girl's shoulder gently. "You survived something extraordinary today. Let that make you strong, not afraid." "Then what happens now?" she asked. "Now you become what you were supposed to become. An instructor, a trainer. Teaching the next generation of pilots how to do what you just did." Phantom becomes a call sign that new aviators hear about in classified briefings, taught by the legend herself. Webb's voice carried something close to admiration. "You saved everyone on that flight, Sarah. The mission failed but the people succeeded. Sometimes that's what matters most." The vehicle drove toward the secure facilities at Andrews while F-22s taxied past them toward hangars. Sarah thought about the passengers aboard Flight 2847 who would go home tonight with stories about fighter jets and emergency descents, and the quiet woman who had been escorted away by military security. They would never know her name. They would never understand exactly what had happened 30,000 feet above them. But they would remember the day their routine flight became something extraordinary. She thought about her orders to stay hidden, to remain anonymous, to complete the transit without incident. Those orders had been impossible to follow once enemy intelligence identified her location. Once hostile forces launched a missile at her aircraft, once the situation required her expertise to keep everyone alive. She had been supposed to stay hidden until circumstances made hiding impossible. Until F-22s surrounded her plane and her legendary capabilities became the only thing standing between passengers and disaster. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from one of the F-22 pilots. "Phantom, it was an honor to fly with you today. The stories don't do you justice. Raptor 1." Sarah smiled slightly and deleted the message according to security protocols. But she would remember those words. Would remember the professional respect from elite pilots who had trusted her tactical judgment without question. Would remember the moment when hiding became impossible and her true capabilities saved lives. The secure facility approached ahead. Sarah took a breath and prepared for hours of debriefing, questioning, analysis. Her hidden transit had failed spectacularly. Her covert status was compromised beyond repair. The quiet retirement she had imagined was finished before it began. But when she closed her eyes, she saw 200 passengers walking away from Flight 2847 alive. She saw families reunited. She saw children who would grow up to tell stories about the day fighter jets surrounded their airplane. She was supposed to stay hidden. But sometimes the most important missions were the ones where hiding became impossible. Where legendary pilots had to reveal themselves one final time to protect innocent people. Where call signs earned in classified operations became real again for the people who needed them most. Phantom had been hidden aboard Flight 2847 for 3 hours and 20 minutes before F-22 Raptors surrounded her plane and everything changed. But in those minutes when her cover failed and danger erupted, she became what she had always been beneath the false identities and covert operations. A pilot who saved people. A legend who earned that status by putting others first. An ordinary woman in a gray sweater who possessed extraordinary capabilities that she would use, whether hidden or exposed, whenever people needed saving. The vehicle stopped at the secure entrance. Colonel Webb opened the door and Sarah stepped out, ready to face whatever came next. Behind them, Flight 2847 sat on Andrews's tarmac, safe and intact, carrying the evidence that some missions succeeded precisely because hiding became impossible. That some legends revealed themselves not through choice but through necessity. That sometimes the best way to stay hidden was to stop hiding and become exactly what the moment required. She had been ordered to remain anonymous. To avoid attention. To complete her transit without incident. She had followed those orders perfectly until the moment they conflicted with keeping innocent people alive. Then she had done what Phantom always did. She had flown the mission that needed flying, regardless of consequences, regardless of exposure, regardless of everything except the lives depending on her expertise. The door closed behind her as Sarah Mitchell, also known as Emma Thompson, also known by a dozen other false identities, most importantly known as Phantom, walked into the secure facility to begin the next chapter of a career that refused to stay quiet. She had been supposed to stay hidden. But some pilots were never meant to disappear completely. Some legends persisted regardless of operational security or classified protocols. Some call signs echoed through aviation history because the people who earned them kept saving lives no matter what their orders said. Flight 2847 would be studied in classified briefings for years. The intercept procedures would be analyzed and improved. The operational security failures would be documented and learned from. But the passengers would remember something different. They would remember the day they survived something terrifying. The day mysterious fighter jets protected them from threats they never saw. The day a quiet woman in their cabin turned out to be something extraordinary. Sarah had boarded in Denver as someone supposed to stay hidden. She had landed at Andrews as a legend who saved 200 people by revealing exactly what she was capable of. Sometimes missions failed in the best possible way. Sometimes hiding stopped being the objective and saving lives became the only thing that mattered. Sometimes the F-22s surrounding your plane meant your cover was compromised, your identity exposed, your quiet future impossible. But it also meant that everyone aboard would see tomorrow. And for Phantom, that had always been the mission that mattered most. The door closed. The debriefing began. And somewhere online, videos of Flight 2847 surrounded by fighters spread across the world, carrying a story about protection and courage and the quiet woman who was supposed to stay hidden until circumstances demanded otherwise. Until staying hidden meant letting people die. Until the moment when being extraordinary became more important than being anonymous. She had been supposed to stay hidden until F-22s surrounded her plane. Then she became what she had always been. Phantom. The legend who saved people when saving people was the only mission that truly mattered.